again. It's Mr. Stewart from Read 20. It's time for another story. Today's selection is by Kate DiCamillo, a wonderful author. The story is called Louise, The Adventures of a Chicken. The story was illustrated by Harry Bliss. On the back it says, "Hope is the thing with feathers," which is a quote by the poet Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers. All right, let's begin. Chapter 1, Louise at Sea. Louise longed for adventure. She left the hen house and went to sea, where the water was deep and dark. Louise stood alone on the deck of the ship and let the wind ruffle her feathers. The sailors spoke a language she did not understand. Everything sounded like this to her. Blarney, 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 Blarney. And just as she was thinking that the sea might not be the adventurous place that she had imagined it would be, a pirate ship appeared on the horizon. Louise watched the black-sailed ship draw near. Her heart beat fast within her feathered breast, because here at last was a true adventure. The pirates boarded the ship and helped themselves to everything that was not nailed down, and that included Louise. A one-armed pirate grabbed her up and said, "Look! I found a chicken!" He held Louise high up over his head, and another pirate shouted, "Ah, fricassee the chicken! Fricassee the chicken!" And another one said, No, the chicken, she must be fried. I like fried chicken." Well, the pirates argued heatedly about how best to consume Louise, and listening to them made Louise's heart beat alarmingly fast in her feathered breast. Another pirate shouted, "Stewed! We should stew the chicken with dumplings." And a third said, "Who cares how? Let's just cook her." I don't think Louise liked any of those ideas. But the pirates were still arguing when a storm began to brew. The wind howled, thunder boomed, rain crashed down, until the ship was tossed around on the high seas, until it cracked in two and began to sink. And Louise saved herself by clinging to a piece of timber. Yeah, a piece of wood. It floats. She floated past the pirate with the dirty hair. He reached out for her with both hands. "Fricassee!" he said, as he disappeared into the mysterious ocean depths. The wind finally stopped howling and the sea became calm once again. The sun rose, and Louise used her wings to paddle along, and as she worked, she thought often and very fondly of her warm, dry hen house back home on the farm. On her 7th day alone at sea, Louise spied land. She guided her makeshift craft to the shore, and she hopped all the way back home to the farm. She arrived just in time for dinner. "Where have you been, Louise?" asked an old hen named Monique. "Oh, here and there," Louise said. She hopped past Monique. She went into the hen house and settled down in the straw. She tucked her beak beneath her wing. She closed her eyes, and there, safe and warm in the hen house, Louise slept the deep and dreamless sleep of a true adventurer. Chapter 2, Louise up high. Still, Louise longed for adventure. Yes, she wanted another adventure. When the circus came to town, Louise left the hen house and followed the bright lights and the loud music. She ended up in line for auditions, tryouts. The ringmaster said, "What is your act?" And Louise flapped her wings And Louise strutted back and forth. And the ringmaster says, "Now, you see here, if you want to join the circus, you must have an act." But then Mitzi, the aerialist, Mitzi's an aerialist, a trapeze artist, she says, "Oh, mon chéri, look at her. See how she moves. Oh, she is meant, of course, to be on the high wire." And it turns out the high wire was actually quite high. Louise walked its length carrying a pink umbrella in her beak. Far below, people clapped and cheered. Louise looked down at the world and was charmed to discover that everything had become very small. However, too soon, walking the high wire with a pink umbrella became rather mundane or boring. And Louise found herself longing for a little more excitement. And it was then that the lion got loose from his cage. Louise's heart once again beat fast within her feathered breast, because here at last was another true adventure. She became so excited that she dropped the pink umbrella and lost her balance. She teetered and she tottered, and she fell. The lion positioned himself carefully. He smacked his lips and he opened his mouth wide. Louise flapped her wings at the last minute and she managed to rise out of reach of the lion's jaws. The lion roared and she hit the ground running. The audience cheered. She ran past the man with the barbells, past the elephant, through the bass drum, until she finally landed on the head of a clown, just as he was putting his hat on, which covered Louise. There, safe in the clown's wig, hidden beneath his hat, Louise thought of the henhouse. What a quiet, spectacularly lion-free place the henhouse was. And she decided once again it was time to head home. Looks like she wrote a resignation letter. She quit her job. Mitzi called out to her, "Goodbye, my sweet Coco Van," as Louise left the circus. "Goodbye, my darling daring chicken." But the ringmaster said, "Wait, you cannot leave. We have just designed a most unique and death-defying act for you." But Louise ignored him. She hopped on down the road toward home. I think he wants to shoot somebody out of a cannon. Would you take that job? When she arrived back at the farm, Monique said, "Louise, what have you been doing?" She said, "Oh, this and that." And she hopped right past Monique and went into the henhouse, where she settled herself comfortably in the straw. She tucked her beak beneath her wing and closed her eyes. And there, safe in the warm henhouse, she slept the deep and peaceful sleep of a true adventurer. Chapter 3 is called Louise Unbound. Unbound? But Louise continued to long for adventure. So she left the henhouse once again and she journeyed to a faraway land where she discovered this fabulous bazaar, an open-air market. She strolled the length of the market, admiring all the plump tomatoes and the green asparagus, the winking jewelry and all the colorful cloth. The vendors all called out greetings to her, and she nodded politely in return. Inside a dusty purple tent, she held out her wing to a fortune teller, who examined her feathers closely and said, in a heavily accented voice, "Yes, I see much adventure in your life. I see the crossing of the seas. I see the walking of the wires, and also I see the tall, dark stranger." Louise didn't think much of this fortune, but she nodded her thanks and left the tent, where she immediately met a tall, dark stranger. who swept her off her feet and shook her very hard. The man yelled at her. Now, Louise couldn't understand what he was saying, but it was obvious that he was quite angry. And once again, her heart began to beat fast and faster and faster in her feathered breast. Well, the man carried Louise away by her feet, and here at last was another true adventure. He put her in a cage that was full of other chickens, and he locked the cage tight. Louise was being held against her will. She was a prisoner. Now, the other chickens didn't seem to be aware of the injustice of being locked in a cage. Louise tried to rally all the other chickens. She told them, "Chickens do not belong in cages." And they looked at her. She said, "No, chickens should roam free." And the other chickens just turned away. But Louise twisted her head out between the wires and examined the lock. And then she set to work picking the lock. Above her, the sun burned high in the sky. As she worked, it slowly began its descent. Is she gonna get away? Finally, at dusk, Louise's patient work had paid off, and the lock fell open with a creaky sigh. "We're free," Louise said to the other chickens, but the news appeared to stun them. "Free," she said again. She hopped down to the ground and gestured to them, "Follow me!" And one by one, the other chickens left the cage. An old mud-colored hen pecked at the hard-packed earth and gave a tentative cluck of pleasure. Two gray hens gazed up at the twilight sky in wonder. Looking at them, Louise felt a wave of longing. She missed, suddenly, her sister hens. She missed the hen house. She wanted to go home. And so she headed west, back to the farm. Looks like she had to cross the desert on a camel, maybe with Lawrence of Arabia. She hitched a ride on the African Queen with Humphrey Bogart, and then she flew in a hot air balloon until, at the end of her long journey, there was Monique waiting for her. And she said, "Oh, Louise, where have you been this time?" And Louise looked at Monique and said, "Okay, I'll tell you." Chapter 4. And she did. All the hens gathered round, and they trembled as Louise told them of her adventure on the high seas. They murmured in alarm as she described the lion in the circus. They clucked their disapproval when they heard about the imprisoned chickens. And as they listened, their hearts started to beat fast, fast within their feathered breasts. And they said things like, "Oh, heavens, Louise!" And they said, "My goodness, Louise!" And they said, "What true adventures you've had, Louise!" And she said, "Yes, I have." And when she was done with the telling, she settled down in her nest and once again tucked her beak beneath her wing. And all her sister hens did the same. Outside the hen house, it began to rain. But inside, safe and warm, all of the chickens slept the deep and dreamless, peaceful sleep of true adventurers. The end. All right. Oh, one of the things I love about this story is how all the other chickens, all the hens who'd never left the farm, they experienced the joy and the anxiety and the adventures that Louise had been on. They enjoyed them because they heard her tell her story. This could be a clue to our big idea. Do you think you'll ever take a big adventure? Oh yes, you most certainly will. In this world, every day is an adventure. And I hope your adventures are going well. I hope you're finding lots of great stories to read and things to look at and things to learn. And thank you for tuning in today on behalf of Read 20 and Mr. Stewart. I'm going to play you out with a little keyboard music here.